This tech slash politics video later, so I just wanted to do a fun Formula One video first. This is where will Sainz go? This is partly based upon, what honestly what I want, and then also partly based upon what I think will happen. There's no like secret information here. I'm just a dude in his living room. I don't really, I'm not like texting Fred Vasseur or anything. So I'm just gonna go through the 10 teams and talk about where I think he's gonna go. So tier four, ain't no chance. Number 10 is McLaren. The reason for it is that like McLaren is really moving up in the standings, right? Like, in Australia they finished three and four. Like they're really kind of solidifying themselves as the third best team behind Red Bull and Ferrari, right? But the reason against is that like they have Oscar, they have Lando, like they're set with their young talent for the next 10 years, right? And like there's no indication from Zach that he wants to get rid of either of those people. Plus, Carlos Sainz already left. Now, let's say Lando decides to go to Red Bull, as like Helmut Marko has kind of spoken about. Like if that happens, then like yeah, I can see it, but I don't really see Lando going to Red Bull. So number 9, Williams. I think this is what happened if there's literally no other option, and James Vowles sells him on the vision. But like the reason against is that like they're pretty bad. Like both last year and also this year so far, they're not doing that well, and they also have no money. Right, like there's some teams where you can kind of see it happening, and I'm going to get into that in a few slides. But like those are the ones where it's like, hey, we're a bad team, but we have a huge amount of cash, so we're willing to pay you an insane amount of money to buy into this vision. They can't do that. Like they couldn't even afford a third chassis for Australia. So I put Williams at the bottom of the list. Like right next to it is Haas, and like same reasons. There's he would go if there's literally no other option, and you really wanted to like break into the U.S. market. But they're pretty bad. They have no money, and there's very dysfunctional organizations so far. The other side of Haas, and I'm going to talk about this in some other videos, is like I'm really impressed with them this year. So I think that they in like 2 or 3 or 4 years maybe that's not the case, but I don't think Carlos wants to do that. All right, tier 3. Okay, this is theoretically possible. I can see I can you can sell me on this happening. Number 7, Alpine, and this is basically what I was talking about with Williams, right? Like they could theoretically pay him a lot of money. Like if Alpine wants, like they can dip into the Renault budget and just give him like a 20-30 million a year contract if they really want to like get like a good driver. But I think Carlos. I mean, if you look at them, especially this year, but also like really since they came back to Formula One, they've been like a shit show, right? And they're dysfunctional, and he was already kicked out of Renault for Daniel Ricciardo, right? So I don't think he really wants to go back in. Like, and since he left, they've like really gone downhill, right? And I guess like the reason is like there are all these stars who are now like invested in Renault, like Ryan Reynolds, Ron McElhenney, Travis Kelsey. If he wants to like do like cross promotion stuff, but I can see that being, I mean he can do that regardless, right? Like if he's the best, he can get all the promotions that he wants. Number 6, like so Alpine, I can see it for the money. Toro Rosso, like I could see this if he wants to like have like a Danny Rick type situation. Like Danny Rick came back to Toro Rosso, hopefully, and getting back into a Red Bull, and like I can see Christian Horner telling him like, hey, like we don't have a seat for you right now, but we have a seat for you in a year. Impress us in Toro Rosso, and you'll be in the Red Bull. And I can see Carlos Sainz being like, well, it's not ideal, but the Red Bull is the best car on the grid, so yeah, why not? The car itself is not really that bad either. Like Yuki Tsunoda is qualifying like 7th and 8th. I think that Carlos Sainz could probably qualify 6th or 7th, maybe 5th in that car. On good days. And he won't be doing really well, but he can do pretty well. The reason against is like I'm pretty sure he wants to contend right now. Like I don't think he wants to, you know, do that type of Daniel Ricciardo type situation. But if he can find any better options as in his top options fall through, like I can see that happening. All right, tier two, I can see it happening. Number five is Sauber, and they were kind of talking about this on the F1 broadcast yesterday. Like, they're basically having this new Audi ownership, and they can tell them like, hey, look, it's going to be a rough like year or two, but you signed a 5 year contract with us. We're going to have this entire Audi muscle behind us, and you know, we're gonna build you a car. We're gonna build you a team. And one thing that kind of struck me when I was looking into this is that like Lewis was 28 when he went to Mercedes. Sainz is 29 right now, and like it took Lewis what 2-3 years to win his first championship with Mercedes, and then he won like seven in a row, right? Like, and I think Carlos Sainz, I think he's good enough to do that. Reasons against is that like as with other teams, it's a shit show. It's not competitive. And you just look at Valtteri's drop off when he went from Mercedes to Alfa Romeo. But again, I can see them, you know, pitching this to him. Number four, Mercedes. So the reasons for historically winning, there's be an open seat, and they have a whole lot of money, right? Like that's kind of like a trifecta. The reason against, is like one, I don't think he's gonna like push to get in there because the past 2 or 3 years the car has been pretty funky. It's not really been like performing very well. Also, like they have a lot of talent that they like and that they're already kind of like talking about, and like I think that Toto Wolff is gonna bring up one of his academy drivers into that seat. I don't think he's gonna give it to somebody else. Like I think he kind of thinks to himself, okay, I have George Russell. He can compete and get us points, and I really want to like test out another new young driver into this seat. I don't think he wants to like give it to another like kind of older person who knows like how many years Carlos Sainz has in him. Like, yeah, Lewis is 40 racing, Alonso's 40 racing, but they're also like world champions. Like, who knows if Carlos Sainz has that in him? Who knows if he has that length? Like, I think I think Toto wants to invest in youth, so that's kind of why I don't see this happening. And then three, like I think people are gonna make fun of me about this in the comments, but I'm holding out hope that he actually just stays on Ferrari. Like reasons for, he's already on the team, he's putting up W's, it's a great car, and Lewis is also just fundamentally not performing that well. I know his car, you know, screwed up in Melbourne, but he didn't really do that well in the first two races of the season. He hasn't done that well last year either, and he didn't do that well the year before. Like Lewis hasn't won a race since losing the championship to Max Verstappen. Like let's just like be clear about that. Like Lewis Hamilton, is not the same Lewis Hamilton in my opinion. I think you're gonna. I think you're getting a much worse Lewis Hamilton, and you're also getting a 40-year-old. How many years can you really have Lewis Hamilton in that seat? If he's already dropping off, like if he's already losing out to George Russell repeatedly, right? Like, I mean, do we think that George Russell is the best driver on the grid? Because if he is, then yeah, sure, like that makes sense that he would lose out to George Russell. But I think George Russell is what, like, fifth, sixth best drivers on the grid, like realistically. So the fact that, Lewis Hamilton is repeatedly losing out to George Russell, like last year he did come third, but 30 points more than Alonso, and also like 50 points more than George Russell. Like that's not like really like a huge gap, and he did lose out to him on many races. So again, I yes, Fred already signed a contract with Lewis, but he can just always like tear that contract up. Like nothing is permanent in Formula One, like or in life. And I think there's a good chance that Fred just rips it up and gives his seat back to Carlos. And then tier one, I put money on it. Number two is Aston Martin. Again, great team, loads of money, good car. They could pay him well, and Alonso's kind of regressing. Um, he did just lose out to Stroll in Australia, which is not a good sign. Um, and I think Lawrence Stroll can just like look at Carlos Sainz and say, "Hey, this is a guy who I can build a future around. He's winning races. He's the only person besides Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez who's won a race in the past 2 years. I think he's the only person besides Max Verstappen who's won a race in the past like 26 races. Like he is a very good driver, and he's the person I want to put in my car. And obviously, the reason against is you might want to keep Alonso. But I think that this is like extremely, extremely likely that he jettisons Alonso, he gets Sainz. This is the type of bold move that Lawrence loves to do, and this is kind of what he already did, with Sebastian Vettel. Although I mean, Sebastian Vettel retired, but I think he was pushed out a little bit. And then number one, like Red Bull. From a science perspective, like why wouldn't you want to race for them, right? Checo has been on the block forever. Sainz is younger. He's putting up numbers. He's the only person besides Max who's won the last 26 races. And it's also like a nice hedge if Verstappen wants to leave. Like Carlos, Checo's kind of like the Valtteri Bottas type person. Like he's the second fiddle, but he's like meant to be second fiddle. While like Carlos Sainz would be a little bit more like Nico Rosberg, where he would actually like challenge Max Verstappen. And who knows, like Max Verstappen, I think he's been like kind of arrogant recently. I think he's kind of been like feeling like he's been completely untouchable and talking about like, oh, I want to drive like rally racing because I think that because I'm bored in Formula One. It's like, okay, well, let's put Carlos Sainz next to you. Let's see how boring it is now. And I think Carlos Sainz can beat him, to be honest. Like, I really like Carlos Sainz. Um, the negative is that same thing, right? Like, you don't want him to actually, like, be in that level of competition, maybe. Maybe that's something that could be disorienting for the team. Although Carlos Sainz has just all around been, like, a great team person. Like, you look at Renault, at McLaren, and Ferrari. All these teams have improved with him there, and everyone seems to like him. But the reason against you might want to get another driver who doesn't pressure Max, or you could even be wanting to get like Lando Norris because Helmut Marko has spoken a lot about Lando Norris, and we all know Helmut Marko's thoughts about people who speak Spanish. Let's just leave it there. But yeah, so that's where I think he's gonna go. Red Bull and Aston Martin, I think, are kind of the big two. I put Red Bull number one. If I had to put money on one, probably Aston Martin, maybe even. Um, but yeah, I think it's kind of a coin toss between those two. Anyway, let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on X. Thanks.